When you say that they have been engineering or orchestrating public perception of this experience from the beginning, what's the earliest known instance of this?
Okay, so the one that is unclassified is Project Blue Book, and that's from 1952. But I know that, and I have to explain how one knows this. So we have documents that talk about Project Blue Book, and that's they're managing the perception, the public perception of UFOs. It goes back to like 47 even, with Roswell and that kind of thing. There's another, and this is what I've found, is that there's an oral tradition that is part of the communities that run these programs, like the UFO programs, right? And that information is carried within people. It's not written down. They even have a word for not writing it down. When they're going to have these meetings, they have this special term, and everybody puts down everything.
What's the term?
It's called pencils up.
Pencils up.
Yeah.
So pencils up means they're just going to discuss these things, and then that's the only record of it.
It's the oral tradition. Now, why I was able to look at this is because I had done work looking at oral traditions in religious communities. Like oral traditions go back 10,000 years, whereas written traditions are like 2,000 years old. Oral traditions are actually more accurate than we think they are. We tend to think of it as telephone game, but you can get a lot of information from oral traditions, and this is actually how a lot of classified information is kept, through oral tradition. Especially
in a very disciplined and structured environment like high-level military.
Yeah.
So they have a perception, and one of the things that you said earlier is that they think that the greater population is not good, and that they will turn on you, and that they're evil, and
that's one faction. So what I found was that there were several different factions within the perception management of UFOs, and one of the factions was responsible for sadly harassing people who do research. And I found this out by being harassed.
How so? How were you harassed?
Okay, so, here I am, just your average professor doing their work and doing it pretty well. At my university, I was the chair of my department, well regarded by my colleagues and students, and never really doing anything weird, right? And then I start to study UFOs, thinking that they're not real, thinking that it's just a new form of religion, and then quickly having people come into my research sphere, who are part of CIA, part of FBI, that kind of thing, and then getting a shock that whoa, this could be dangerous, and maybe I shouldn't be doing this, and thinking but
just simply because those people are contacting you,
it indicated to me that there was something that I shouldn't maybe be doing, that it could be dangerous.
Right, that you could suffer consequences for your curiosity or for your research.
Yeah.
And that they would punish you, or you could be punished, or
that's
you could
what
be targeted.
Yeah.
No, most certainly.
And plus, I had done some research on UFOs by that time, of course.
But what is it about the research, and what is about what you could possibly uncover that would be so dangerous?
Okay, so of course, that's a question that's loaded. So
yes.
I'm going to talk a little bit about, I'll answer it in part.
Okay.
So in part, this is before the crash retrieval became a term that the Congress used.
Right.
So I was...
what year are we talking about?
So I started in 2012.
Okay.
By 2015 and 16, I was already in full shock mode of, wow, this is bigger than I thought. And I had been invited to go to a crash retrieval spot in New Mexico that was under a no-fly zone. And I still didn't believe that when UFOs at this point. You have to understand that. So I just thought that the person inviting me is Tyler. He's a scientist. He works for the Space Force. He believes this, and I'm wondering, how does he even believe that this is real? We're we're going with Gary Nolan, who's from Stanford, and he's out. But at the time, I called him James in my book. And I'm the one actually who invited him to go because I didn't really want to go by myself, you know? And so I insisted that Gary go with me. And Tyler figured out who Gary was, and he said, okay. So we went out there. We had to actually wear blindfolds. And it was out in the middle of this place in New Mexico. I don't know where. I know what was near it, but I don't know where the actual place was. And we were looking for parts, right, that had been put out there. And during the time period, so I think part of it was the danger was that parts exist, right? So things like this do exist, and there are anomalous materials. This is what I was finding out, and I think that this is what I'm an okay researcher. It's not like I would make this up, nor would I lie. You know, I'm publishing with Oxford, so my reputation is at stake, right? So I'm doing the best I can to kind of adjudicate, like, am I being fed disinformation or, you know, what's going on? Gary now will be able to identify by taking these parts back and analyzing them through his laboratories, whether or not they're engineered or not. And he's been doing that ever since. So these are the kinds of things that I would have found out. I think part of it was also that I was finding out that there was an oral tradition and that the perception management was very tight. And I think this is what they were afraid. But I've said this now publicly, so.
So tell me about the crash retrieval site.
Yeah. So this is so now you have to understand this is a long time period. So I start this in 2012. I get this shock where I'm being, you know, people are asking me to meet, you know, people from these programs and from the Space Force. And I'm actually not meeting with them because I'm waiting. I'm kind of thinking I've got to think this through. It wasn't until about 2014 that I actually start to meet the people, like the affiliated people. And they show me some things, and they asked me to go to this crash retrieval site in New Mexico.
No, this is a recent crash?
No, it's okay. So this crash is part of a series of crashes that happened in the 1940s.
So the Roswell.
It wasn't Roswell, actually. It was one of the crash sites that's near. It's in New Mexico, but it's not Roswell.
So there was more than one crash in New Mexico.
Yeah, I think they
allegedly.
Allegedly, yeah. They said that there were probably 4, maybe even more. I don't know.
What a bunch of UFOs keep crashing.
I know. That's what. Well, they don't believe that they crashed. They use that term, but they don't think it's a crash. They think that it's. They personally, I'll tell you from a professor's standpoint, like their idea of this is that it's a donation. They call it the donation site. So they think that these were donated materials and they're going to get information, and they do. And that's how Tyler was able to create a lot of the things that he created through, and he would fly these on the space shuttle, by the way, these experiments and so forth. It was very, very fascinating to me. I mean, I think anybody would be fascinated with it, to tell you the truth.
When you say fly these, you don't mean physical materials.
So he would have an idea that he would get through these protocols that I told you about. So he practices these protocols, and it would be related to something that he would then want to fly on the space shuttle, because this was during the time the space shuttle was happening. And the space shuttle had anti-gravity environments, and he needed these environments in order to create this. And now this is actually a whole field called biologics. So there's a real field now where people are doing these experiments in space and creating things that we can't create here.
Like what?
Medicine, certain types of metals, kind of like ceramic metals. He created something. I actually wrote about this and published about it. Totally academic paper, so most general readers would never read it. It's because it has academic jargon in it. But I talked all about it.
Got something here. Researchers capitalize on microgravity in space to accelerate drug discovery and development. That was one of the speculations about the type of metals that were retrieved, supposedly, from these crash sites, that these, whatever these metals were, they were layered, and that they could only be layered specifically the way they were done in a zero-gravity environment.
Yeah, that's right. They were engineered. So
Right.
I actually did talk to Gary before I came on your podcast because I just wanted to be sure, because I don't want to represent his research incorrectly.
Right.
So I said, can you please, recap it? He always thinks I'm an idiot too. He's like, "God, how many times have I told you this?" So, yeah, so he has parts from various of the crash sites that are clearly engineered. Not by humans,
Right.
but he doesn't. He's not going to jump to the conclusion that it's extraterrestrial. He says we just don't know.
Right. It's just something that is outside of the realm of our current understanding of how we create physical materials.
That's correct.
And how much of this stuff do they have? Do they have full crafts?
I've never seen any full crafts.
What did you see when you went to the crash site?
So I saw two types of materials. One I can say looks like kind of metallic frog skin.